Baltimore and WNST.net. I've left this guy alone for a couple of weeks throughout my Dear Orioles series. Matter of fact, I don't think I've had him on since my Dear Orioles series began. I think I was explaining to you, Alan McCallum, what I was trying to do during the month of July and what I felt like would be, I don't want to call it downtime, but non-Ravens time, non-Capitals time, a time of the year where we're doing, hey, Alan, what's your favorite sports movie or, whatever. And in a year when they're 40 games under 500 and sort of chasing the legend of the '88 Orioles at this point. And then there's the sell-off of all of these players and who's doing it and what the future is. And I don't know that we know any more or any less. We know the names of Yusniel Diaz now, and we'll learn some more names from Britton and from Adam Jones and whatever becomes of all this and whoever the draft picks are. But, boy, there's no cavalry coming over the hill in any way for this franchise. And if you think it sucks today, I'll just wait till next year. That's how I see it.
Well, it's good to talk to you, Ness. Look, I think next year, if this year is done right, could be a lot of fun and optimistic. Watching young guys play and watching an organization try to find itself. I think that while it might not be appealing to people that just want to go out and see a World Series, if you're a baseball fan, aficionado, watching that with actual potential talent is something that could be really interesting. I mean, not that something as miraculous as the '89 Orioles could come along, but I mean, it was fun watching Matt Wieters and Chris Davis back in the day, and then Manny Machado arrived, Nick Markakis and Adam Jones. Watching those players develop was difficult in the sense that there was a lot of losing, but you could tell the difference between players that could actually make a difference and the ones that got run through here for much of the 14 years prior.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know that we ever really appreciated that period of time. And, I'm revisiting the Dear Adam Jones letter that I'm going to release later this week. And, I sort of forgot how uppity he was and tweeting out about, I'm going to go right to Peter when I want things. This is before any of the winning happened, right, and all of that he had spent a good 5 years, not to mention with Roberts and Markakis and, the early part of Wieters of a lot of losing that I don't know we ever really saw 12 coming around the corner, unless Arrieta, Mattis, Britton, those guys became really good frontline starting pitchers. There wasn't a lot of hope in this thing. It sort of happened very, very quickly once it happened that it wasn't fun watching those guys because we had 10 years of awful on the front of that. Whatever Yusniel Diaz has is going to be a whole lot different than what the Adam Joneses of the worlds fell into, because what they fell into was 10 years of awful. At least Diaz and whoever this new group is going to be, even the Bundys and the Gosmans sniffed what real baseball was around here, and Chris Davis as well, because they're all coming back next year, I guess, right?
I don't know. I mean, their team's sniffing around. They're like, well, Chris Davis is going to be here. Let's get that out of the way. Unless they release him, he's going to be an Oriole. But Gosman and Bundy and Scope, apparently their team's sniffing around him. And the question will be, how serious about rebuilding are they actually? So, I mean, you would think that they would need a haul to trade those guys, but you never know. I'm certain that they would require a haul for Scope. But Gosman and Bundy, I mean, I don't know. But let's assume that they come back, and I've been of the belief that if they make some true deals that, and I'm not talking about contention, I'm not talking about a championship, I'm talking about respectability. If you have Cobb and Gosman and Bundy as the top three in a rotation, even Cashner, I mean, those guys in theory, and I know Cobb's having a horrible year and nobody's having a Cy Young campaign, but with an offense that can be more dynamic, more interesting, with actual talent, guys are going to have good at-bats, and a defense that can actually play defense, then the team could be respectable, which they were for much of the last 5 or 6 years, and are certainly not right now. So, I mean, there are, it all depends on what your focus is. If it's simply, hey, I want to see a team that's going to win right now, then you will have no interest in what's going to happen over the next couple of years to the Baltimore Orioles.
Well, I would say if it's about seeing players that we believe are going to be good Major League Baseball players, that's not what Pedro Alvarez and Colby Rasmus have,
Certainly not.
and Mark Trumbo represent around here. Not even Beckham. Not, I don't even know who's in the lineup that I'm going to say would be on a winning team or a 500 team in 2020 or 21 at this point, especially if they're talking about moving Bundy and Gosman, and they are. And I'll get to the lunacy in a moment, and I know you'll love the meat on the bone with this one, Alan, but the notion that Dan Duquette is actually the guy making these deals with the Bundys and the Gosmans is just, it's mind-boggling to me that they haven't figured out who they want to run the organization, and they're letting the guy that isn't going to be running the organization really greatly affect the future of the organization. It's mindless. It really it flies against all common wisdom that you would use in any line of work, I believe.
So let me say this. If they have made a decision that they trust, and we're assuming we're talking about the younger Angelos children. If they've made the decision that Dan Duquette is the guy that they're going to run with, at least they've made a decision. Would it be my choice? No, it wouldn't.
Well, if he's the guy you're running with, announce the 2-year extension you've given him.
Right, exactly.
And then I'll have the confidence to say, all right, then it's, then he's settled things since Toronto. He's happy. They've had a come to Peter meeting. Notice it's not a come to Jesus meeting. It's a come to Peter meeting.
If they choose him, it will be with a title change. I would bet the farm on it to president of the Baltimore Orioles. I think that's the thing that he would be looking for, and that's certainly why he was going to leave in Toronto to head to Toronto. And if they've sort of given him the assurance that they're not going to be,
how would you feel about that if Lou and John parade Buck and Dan and Brady out? And you know what they say? We've won with these guys. We're keeping these guys. They've all got 3 years. Here we go, 19, 20, and 21. Kumbaya, we're all in together. That might be better than whomever's in that seat come January, because I tell you what, they're going to have a hell of a time out in the open market recruiting qualified individuals.
If they brought all three of those individuals out and said, this is the way we're running, I would tell you that is an absolute mistake. To expect a course correction from people that have established roles, whether they're muddy in terms of what their responsibilities are or not, that doesn't make any sense. If you've got to decide on one, at least in the front office. I think if it's Dan, then you have to say, farewell to Brady. If it's Dan, he needs to be able to pick his own field manager. And I think we've all heard the rumors about the disagreements, let's say, between Dan and Buck. And if he decides that Buck's not the guy for the rebuild, then you move on. I'll say again, if Dan Duquette would not be my choice, but at least it would be a choice. If it's all three coming back with the same sort of conduits to them and the speculation and question that goes along with it, that is just that would be an absolute horrible choice. If they fire Dan or let Dan Duquette's contract run out at the end of this season and pick someone else to run the organization moving into the future, then that makes absolutely no sense to let the guy who was walking out the door set your organization up for you for the next 5 years. That makes absolutely no sense. So,
well, Duquette making the deal for Machado makes no sense either.
Unless they've assured him he's the guy that's going to go, that's going to run, that's going to decide the course of the team. My assumption right now is that they've given Dan Duquette the keys again and said, go do this. And we will not interfere. Is that my choice? No. Do I think that Dan Duquette is a solid baseball man? Yeah. I mean, I think Dan Duquette knows the game. I think that he understands some of the rhythms of it. I think some of it's passed him by, but I don't think that he is Sid Thrift. I don't think he's in that position. I don't agree with a lot of his choices. I don't agree with his obsession with the Rule 5 draft. Now, if he's been doing things over the last few years because he couldn't do what he wanted to do, and they have assured him that they will give him carte blanche to do that, then you sign on again and you say, okay, we'll see what happens. But again, would he be my choice? No. Not because I don't think he knows baseball, not because I don't think he knows the game, but because I don't. In 2012, when he came in, I appreciated his mode of thinking for how to get this team going. But he found starting pitching at a time when no one else who'd been in the Orioles front office could. But I haven't seen him do anything in the last few years to set this team up for the future. And the evidence of that is on the field right now with them below 40 games below 500 before the All-Star break. But that nobody actually knows the entire truth about how things have happened behind the scenes. No matter what we think, nobody.
We all know that Peter Angelos gave Chris Davis the money. I mean,
right.
So that everyone ran from that holding their nose other than Peter. So, where the lion's share of the money went, where, I don't know, you tell me what $25 million is going to represent a year over the next 5 years toward their budget, but it's certainly going to represent 15 to 20% of their annual operating budget on baseball players. That's for sure.
But the word is that Buck Showalter went and advocated for that signing. So, I mean, if that's true, then it's not. Then he was certainly complicit in trying to make that happen. Again, the truth of all of this, the 100% truth is something that only those in the room will know. To quote Hamilton, no one was in the room when it happened, but you can certainly speculate on what happened. The point is, if you're going to blow up your house, here's an analogy for you. If you're going to blow up your house but you own the property and you want to start over, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to have the architect who maybe didn't start the first build. Andy McPhail did that, but finished it. You didn't like where it ended up, so you hire him again to do it.
Dude, I got a better analogy than that even. Dan Duquette making these Manny Machado deals is the woman you're married to that you're divorcing, and you're allowing her to pick the house and the car and your next job. It's absurd. I mean, if Duquette's not here long term, he shouldn't be making these decisions. Let's start with that before we talk about the validity of Brock and Britton and Jones, let alone the Bundys and the Scopes and the Gosmans. The guys that you would have said back in March, they're untouchable. All of a sudden, we're listening now. And I don't know who's doing the listening because I don't know who's going to be running the organization next February, next March.
So, look, I mean, Machado and Britton are the two guys that you figure you can get hauls for. They might actually get more for Zach Britton than they got for Manny Machado. I don't know. We'll see. But he's certainly, if you looked at the postseason in the last few years, there's no question that bullpens have equaled in the postseason the value of starting pitchers because you've got to win the first 5 or 6, but you got to win the last 3 or 4 too. So, I mean, Zach Britton is a difference maker if he's truly healthy, and I think everybody knows that. So, I mean, if they're shrewd and play teams off of each other, it looks like they're trying to do that, and get the best deal for Zach, I mean, they really could be in decent position, particularly if you get anything out of the Cedric Mullins and the Austin Hayes players. And, if you get 2 or 3 of those guys to be as legitimate ball players, and they get back quality pieces from Britton and Machado, then you have something to talk about. Jones, you're not going to get anything difference-making necessarily from Jones unless you sort of put it all into one player. Same thing for a guy like Trumbo. I mean, at this point, Brad Brock, and I mean, how the mighty have fallen. I mean, I guess people would take him just as an arm, but Brad, who was a spectacular leader for the last couple of years, has really fallen on hard times. I don't know. We'll see what they get from those guys. But I mean, Zach Britton is the next really big attraction for teams. Now, Gosman, Scope, and Bundy. I would assume that you could get something for real for Dylan Bundy. I think people see a lot of potential there, and he needs to to mature. He needs to get healthy. He needs to find some consistency. But I think everyone sees that he has a chance to be a star. Has he reached that yet? No. Is it guaranteed? No. But I think people recognize that potential. Gausman can eat innings for a team that's looking for it out of the fourth spot of a rotation. The next big piece is Jonathan Scope. Now, there's a lot of debate. Do you sign him? Do you trade him? And he's in the same position Manny Machado was in last year, where his contract is up next year. What do you do? And I'm firmly of the belief that, at 26 years old, a power hitting second baseman who plays solid defense when he's right. I mean, Jonathan Scope is exactly what a lot of teams are looking for. Doesn't get on base as much as you would like, but in the right lineup, that's not necessarily a horrible thing as long as you don't have 8 of them. See the Baltimore Orioles over the last few years. And this is the right moment for Jonathan Scope. He's, after every season in his career getting better, he's having a down year, but you see him starting to hit. I definitely believe in Jonathan Scope. I think that this is just an aberration moment in a season of horrible aberrations for a lot of these players. This is the moment to go to Jonathan Scope and say, here's the contract, 5 years, $18 million a year. Sign it. If he doesn't sign it, then he's got to be on the next train out. And at that point, you can get a haul, not what you're going to get for Manny Machado last year, but you can get something for Jonathan Scope for real. So do I think that if you sign him, he could be one of the cornerstones of this club? Yes, I absolutely do. But you have to offer it to him right now, no playing around, and if he doesn't sign before the trading deadline, you've got to let him go too. So I mean, if they decide to go that deep and really trade off these guys, Gausman, Bundy, Scope, and if you're going to trade Scope, you might as well trade Gausman and Bundy because then there really is no foundation. Then you're talking about full-scale rebuild where you're not just talking about the future of the Major League club, but you're infusing, in theory, enough lifeblood into the minor league system as well that you should jump certainly into the upper third of the major leagues for your minor league system. Again, are they shrewd enough to make all that happen, to think that way? Now is the moment for them to show us what they can really do.
He is Alan McCallum. He has been our baseball and Orioles historian here for the better part of a quarter of a century. I know we got a lot of football on the brain here and a lot of Ray Lewis on the brain as he goes into the Hall of Fame. We still have a few seats left on our Canton bus. You can throw me an email, nasty@WNST.net, or find out more out on our Facebook and our Twitter and our social media as well. Alan, I don't want to revisit the Machado thing, but you and I haven't really talked in a month, sort of kind of on purpose. In retrospect, all that went into it, I wrote my Dear Manny letter, and it's over, dude. It's done. He's not coming back, and that's the weirdest part of this is dealing that kind of a player in the middle of the season where he's just extracted. Been a long time since we had one of those. We had 6 months to gear up for Messina not being the opening day starter, and blah 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 blah. This is much more of like a heart surgery for this team. And, the limping into the weekend in Toronto, they're going to lose a lot of baseball games the rest of the way. If you hated the first half, wait till you see the second half.
Well, look, this season at this point, from about, May 15th, this season was about one thing. About two things. Making trades to improve your farm system long term, and being bad enough to get the first draft pick next year, right? So I mean that's where they are right now, and they need to be the worst team in baseball. As painful as that is to say, that's what the rest of the season is about, so that they can have a future on the back of a can't miss prospect that they can't miss on. Manny, you're right. I'm as you were saying that, I was trying to think back to the last time the Orioles traded, a Hall of Fame type talent during the season. They lost Mike Messina to free agency. They traded Eddie Murray in the offseason, but I can't think of anybody. I guess that's maybe an indictment on how little talent they've had over the last 30 or 40 years.
Well, they've never had a heart transplant on July 15th before,
right?
Literally.
So, look, I wrote this on Facebook earlier in the week. This town is caught in 1965 and 1977, and to some degree 1985. The era of players playing in one town for their entire careers is long gone. When it happens, it's a rarity, but it's long gone, and it's long gone for a couple of reasons. The salaries are too great. You have to, if you're going to do that, you have to be ready to build around that player, and you have to have the kind of pipeline and farm system so that when other players start to price themselves out, you can replace them, knowing that this player is going to be a cornerstone. And, for example, Joe Mauer in Minnesota, I mean, he was that kind of player, but we've seen the steep decline of his career over the life of the huge contract they gave him, and it's hampered the team. I mean, Chris Davis is certainly not homegrown, but, I mean, we're going to see how that contract may hamper them going forward for the next 4 years. Manny, we've talked about this a lot. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Manny's a great player. I think that he is maybe the best talent, offensive talent I've seen come out of the Orioles system in my lifetime. He's got more talent than Cal Ripken. Is he a better player than Cal Ripken? We'll debate that at the end of his career. But he's got more talent than Cal. He has more talent than Brooks. I mean, he's just a natural physical athlete and specimen. That said, and he moved to third base because they needed him. He didn't complain about it. He played a good soldier and didn't complain about it for several years because J.J. Hardy was a leader on this team. He was a Gold Glove talent through most of his time here, and he set the tone for a lot of people. And I think Manny respected that and wanted to wait his turn. And I am absolutely convinced that last year he suffered through his worst offensive season because J.J. was hurt. He knew his contract was coming to an end. He wanted to play shortstop, and they didn't move him. And I think he sulked through a lot of last year and wasn't particularly present through a lot of it. And I think that cost him. For all the hand-wringing that went on this year about Manny moving to shortstop when he should be at third base, that was never going to make the difference to this team being 40 games under 500 and winning a championship. I believe that putting him at shortstop made him happy. We talked about this before the season started, Nestor, that doing that might be the thing that puts him in the mindset to have an MVP-type season, have all of that talent and ability come together and be the great player that everyone knew that he could be, has seen him being. And that's largely happened.
Well, he played his role the first 90 days so that they could get as much out of him.
Right.
And I don't know what they would have gotten 18 months ago. I don't know what they would have gotten 12 months ago. But, people seem to be happy with the deal. They would have gotten more before. I don't think there's any doubt about that because just given the amount of time, and they would have wound up saving them, $20, $25 million as an organization that they've now paid him to play baseball for a year and a half. And the same thing with Zach Britton on the backside of the injury and having to sign him and all that stuff. They've really wasted a lot of money on losing to the last year and a half, let alone what they would have gotten back in return.
And traded talent to lose some more last year. Look, to trade Manny last season, you would have gotten at least one, if not two, top-tier A-level talents from a club, from their farm system. What they got from the Dodgers, and I'm not telling them I know these players intimately, but from what I've read, from what I've understood, they got 2 or 3 second-tier talents, guys that aren't necessarily can't miss, but could hit. And for 2.5 months, and they got 5 players in total. So for 2.5 months rental of a player like that, who the Dodgers might not even try to keep because they've got a shortstop coming back who's a young guy with top tier talent. That's not a bad haul. I mean, so they didn't do what they should have done early with Manny, but they did the best they could late, and I respect that. I do. So I don't have a problem with that. But just in terms of Manny and his time here, what I said to you before, I still stand on. Manny is probably going to command $300 million. I think he's going to get more money than Bryce Harper. Just the fact that he's
and there are going to be bidders. It's not just the Yankees and the Red Sox. Question. It's going to be the Cubs. It's going to be the Phillies. It's the Marlins may dip their toe. There are going to be plenty of bidders for him.
I can't see why the Yankees and Red Sox would do that, given that they are fairly set at both sides on both counts on the left side of the infield, either already there or coming quickly. We'll see.
I think the Phillies will pay the most, so they make the most sense for me.
It would seem, yes. So to command that kind of money, I want that player to be the most mature, the most ready. Always has his head in the game, always, both on the field and off the field. And as I've said to you before, as good as Manny is, as talented as he is, he's not that guy. We've seen him just not be in the game, either running out balls or making mistakes. Not at third base, but at shortstop, you've seen him do that. And there are times when he's just a flat-out knucklehead. I mean, just things when he did stupid things. I think he has a good heart. I think he's a good kid, and I know I'm going to miss seeing him handle the hot corner, certainly for the Orioles. But even at shortstop, I will miss seeing him wear the colors. But when it comes down to it, he's not the guy I give $300 million to. He's going to get it. Somebody will. But I've seen him play since the day he came up to the major leagues. And you can't. The guy that gets that contract has to be a leader, has to have his head in the game at all times, has to be willing to sort of, in theory, run through a wall. And I use that as a metaphor in all moments. And that just wasn't what I saw from Manny. So, particularly where they are, it would be a completely different conversation if the farm system was ready to spit out new players, and they were, even if they were at 500, but you could say, hey, look, we see our future coming. We want Manny and Scope to be this foundation for that team. That makes all the sense in the world. That's not where they are. So the ultimate question is, do the Orioles have to benefit from Manny Machado, period. Do they benefit from him being the highest paid player and carrying that mantle for the Orioles? Or do they benefit from him being traded so that they can try to build the kind of farm system they need to sustain themselves moving forward? And that was the only question that had to be answered, given where they were in this season, by the time you hit June. And they made the decision they had to make, and I applaud them for it. It wasn't an easy thing. And I know, there are people that can't. There are pictures of kids crying on Facebook, and people saying, I'm done with this team. They did what they needed to do, and the reality is, and you want to argue how much money the Orioles have and they spent it. I'm not going to argue with you, but it is not a strong business model for the Orioles to try to compete on a payroll basis with the Yankees and the Red Sox. What is the best model for the Orioles is exactly what Dan Duquette has now said they're finally going to do: increase their scouting department, increase their analytics department, actually spend on international scouting and international players. I mean, that's the kind of sustained model that this organization needs to adopt. And to do that and to not have it take a decade, you have to do something big to jumpstart it. And Machado and Britton have a chance to be that. Again, a year too late, it would have been a very different. If they'd gone into 2018 with a young club, you're still going to have some veterans, but with guys traded away last year and top tier prospects coming back for guys like Britton and Machado, maybe Jones, maybe a Trumbo, I don't know. Then people would be...
They wouldn't have spent the money on Cobb, and they wouldn't have spent the money on Cashner either, I guess.
And that would have been fine, because they would have...
Well, they would have pitchers that would be pitching in those spots instead, I guess. They'd have their own Davies or Eduardo Rodriguez sort of banging around from the Machado trade, right?
Right. So, I mean, the tenor of this season would have been very different. People would have known what the team was going to be. I think they could have gotten excited about the young guys, and they could have sold that. What makes this hard is that the Orioles spent 4 months last season deluding themselves, went into the season and didn't understand it. And frankly, none of us did. how bad they actually were going to end up being. Because what happened in September, we knew the pitching staff was bad, but we saw this incredible run in July, or August, last season of offense. And then they completely flamed out in September. We knew that they were swing and miss hitters. We knew they swung for the downs. We knew they didn't walk, but they completely fell apart last year. And we've talked about it before. Buck plays his guys into the ground, and he get away with it in theory in seasons when they were good, and it didn't work at all last year. You thought, well, the offense will find its way back. They still won't walk enough. They'll still strike out too much, but they'll still hit 4 home runs a game, and they'll win somewhere between 80 and 87 games, and we'll see whether that's good enough to get them to the second wild card. Never thought they were going to be anything better than the second wild card, but I said it to you at the beginning of the season. I'll say it to you now. They had enough talent on the team that they should have been better than the majority of the clubs in the American League. Good enough to get them in that spot. For all of this to happen has been dumbfounding, quite frankly. But that is clearly not the way the season went. So they deluded themselves into all of that. And what is hard as a fan or for the people watching this is that, as you said, to tear it apart in the middle of the season on the back of they literally couldn't win a game against the American League in June. I mean, think about that for a second. They didn't win a game.
When this is all over with, dude, you're going to do the math on this, and this could be the worst season in modern. I mean, they have a lot of losses ahead, and I don't know where the wins are coming from. And I know as the Britons and the Jones and the Brocks are all tapped to get off the boat, and Lord knows if Bundy and Gosman and Scope were to go in the next week and a half, it could really be crazy around here by August 5th,
Yeah. So, I mean, they're doing what they have no choice to do, and it's a tough pill to swallow because of the timing and the expectation coming into the season and knowing what lies ahead. And they could have written a completely different story if they come into 2018 with young guys and moving and knowing that you're going to move forward that way. That didn't happen, but that doesn't mean you don't go about the business that needs to be done because you're trying to spare feelings. People, I guess Manny Machado had the air of greatness about him even from when they drafted him. But, Adam Jones, Chris Davis, even a guy like J.J. Hardy, I mean, people came to love those players because they won, because they dragged the Orioles out of 14 years of the stink of losing, and you come to fall in love with that. And for what people are lamenting now, there will be other players wearing those colors that will bring that about. Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be 2020? That remains to be seen. But players go.
Dude, it's hard to stop losing, and especially when you have the Yankees and the Red Sox, you need to be so much better at everything than they've been. And I don't want to say the blind squirrel and finding the nut or whatever, and I don't want to say that it was lucky in the last couple of years, but there was a degree of the Yankees and the Red Sox being down that sort of opened the door that's not there right now and not there for the foreseeable future. They're going to have to be better than the Red Sox and Yankees as a franchise, better run, better marketed.
Yes.
They need to make money. They need to sell tickets. They need to have money at their disposal to spend, and they have none of the boxes checked right now. And for that's why I'm writing the Dear Orioles series.
So the timing wasn't an accident. The Yankees, after winning for a decade, almost to an astronomical degree, George got his hands on things again for a while, and they signed a ton of free agents before he passed, and they got old and slow and faster than they probably would have in the past, and that affected them. And for the Red Sox, I mean, I think the Red Sox did a lot of things to win after 100 years of not doing it, and it cost them their farm system. And so the Orioles, after losing for 14 years while all of that winning was going on for those two clubs, finally found an architect who could start to put it together, and it got finished off by Dan Duquette right as it was happening. So I mean, that timing wasn't an accident. The Red Sox lost for a couple of years, had the money to back it up, had enough scouting, and drafted well to get themselves back together. And then the Yankees did what the Orioles didn't do last year. They looked at it before it got really awful and said, man, we need to blow this up and start over again. And they did it. So, I mean, the timing of the turnaround for those clubs isn't an accident either. The Orioles can be better run than the Yankees and the Red Sox. The Orioles can find players to compete with the Yankees and Red Sox, not out of free agency necessarily, but out of scouting and shrewd decisions and really evaluating people and then training them within the system, both at the minor and major league level, to be good. Those things can happen in the 21st century, Nestor. But if they are trying to be better than them in terms of, well, we're gonna go out and find 3 players at the top level of free agency, I don't think any of us believe that can happen. But for the former to happen, they have to find the right people to run the organization. They need to give them money to spend on the right things. International scouting, increasing the scouting department, analytic department. I mean, those are the things they need to do, and then they need to let the dinner simmer, so to speak. It's not going to happen over. It's not going to happen.
It's like a
overnight.
good soup. You make it today, but you're not eating it today. Yeah,
right. I mean, those are the things they need to do. Is it impossible? No, it's not. Does it feel impossible given the recent history of the Baltimore Orioles? If it doesn't feel impossible, it feels awfully close to impossible. I'm not going to judge them on 2020 right now, but I have concerns about 2020 because of 2015, 16, 17, and 18. How's that?
Well, we have a long road ahead, and, none of our conversations, and I remember for the better part of a decade and a half, you and I didn't have a whole lot of positive conversations when the upside was, can they win 72 or 75 this year?
Right.
If everything goes perfect, if they bring Cobb back next year, they can win 75. And I've, revisited all that. I don't know where this is going. I'm writing these Dear Orioles letters one by one, just to kind of get it off my chest and to get it out on the record, because I don't know when the light is going to seep through again into this tunnel of darkness, because, this is, there's no saying they get out of this. There's no saying that the next manager, the next set of players, I don't even know who the next set of players are. You can only hope that they could be a shadow of what Adam Jones and Manny Machado and, that group of players represented around here, which was a winning baseball team, a team that had a chance to win. I don't know when that next group's going to happen. I will say this. I've looked back on the 88 season with Ron Snyder and some other folks, and, seeing the Brady Andersons and the Pete Harnishes and the Kurt Schillings and the names of the Greg Olsons that would be the next group of players. Okay, bring it on. I guess that's what the Mullins and the rest of these guys are. I just hope that they're not part of the Jeff Stone, and a part of the Craig Worthington and the Ken Gerhardt era,
Manny Alexander and Juan Bell.
Correct.
Right. Look, and that's the nature of prospect.
That is it.
So, I mean...
Oh, dude, I can go back to Jim Fuller and Drungo Hayeswood. My dad would give you Steve Dalkowski. I mean, I got him all night. I can go all night with it, but that can't... They have no wiggle room for any of that. They need Machados, and they need Markakises, and they need Wiederses, and... I don't know, dude. I don't know. I see too many Ciscos. You know what I mean?
So I've been saying to you for a couple of years now that I believe the fundamental belief about drafting pitching, putting all stakes in, growing the arms and buying the bats is fundamentally backwards. Because, as you said, prospects are, it's crazy. It's very hard to predict what a prospect's going to do. And the only thing worse than trying to predict what a position player is going to do from his first career is trying to predict what pitching is going to look like for their career. The amount of failed pitching prospects is probably the greatest failure rate in all sports.
Yeah, we talk about first round bust and Matt Elam around here or Rashad Perryman. Try to draft pitchers, especially left-handed ones that are 18 or 19. I mean, Brian Taylor, right?
It's insane. I mean, so Matt Hobgood and what was the left?
Adam Lowen.
The flame-throwing lefty that that
Matt Riley.
Matt Riley, thank you very much. I mean, so you look at that, and to spend all of your top draft picks going for that with the failure rate for pitching doesn't make sense to me. Obviously,
I can sit here and go all night, dude. I can give you bad pitching for, forever.
So if you build your farm system on the strength of a ton of position players, first of all, you're going to get you can't miss on all of them. You're going to have enough everyday players to work at the major league level. You get the reputation for developing strong positional talent, and you can trade far more guys to find the one or two or three pitchers you need to make up a rotation than to make up an entire lineup. You trade those guys, and then when your position players at the major league level go to free agency, age out, you can let them go and bring up the next guy. And I just think that is a better, more efficient use of the pipeline for prospects, which is no sure thing. I think the math of that makes far more sense. And if you need to spend free agent money, and everybody does to some degree, it's a lot easier to spend on one ace pitcher who's going to command a tremendous amount of money when you know your position players are not going to take up that much of your payroll. So one or two pitchers coming in a year when you say, okay, we're ready to do this now, it's much less painful to do that as opposed to having to, trying to draft 10 pitchers, having one of them work out, and then you're still trying to struggle. I believe that is the process, the formula that I would go about building an organization so that you have a strong flow of position players, and you can use that as collateral to bring in pitching, to let your free agents go, to keep the wheel turning, let's say every 5 or 6 years on your organization and always being viable without being so expensive that you can't function anymore.
Alan, I will let you breathe. I will let it breathe. I will, take a little break. And, at some point we'll get together when all the dealing's done, as Kenny Rogers said. There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. And we'll find out whether the Bundys and the Scopes and the Gosmans were, I guess nothing more than decoys at this point. But certainly it has made us all sit up at attention and wait for our WNST text to come courtesy of Coons Ford Security Boulevard. Alan, take care of yourself. Always good to talk baseball with you, my friend.
About 10 days from now, it's going to be very interesting to see where all the dust is cleared, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, and I'll be headed out to Canton, Ohio to watch the Indians and the Pirates and all that stuff. If you want on the Ray Lewis trip, you can toss me an email, nasty@WNST.net. I have a handful of seats remaining for that. Big shout-out to our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Make sure you're downloading that ROFO app. They also have the rewards card that you can use. And use that when you're pumping your gas. You'll get your fried chicken and your Western fries for free. Tastes even better when it's free. Nasty@WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We're also out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Anything you miss, all the Dear Orioles letters, all of our current content, Ravens, Orioles, lots of Ravens chats with alums about Ray Lewis, as well as the voters who made Ray Lewis a Hall of Famer next week out in Ohio. We're getting ready for football season. We're ready for the trading season, and my God, I might even talk some hockey. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.